it takes a little faith, and it takes a little complicated, uncomfortable grace, and it takes a little time, and it takes a little humbleness to change your mind.
Hi, I'm Nigel, and welcome to my podcast, Songs Nobody Asked Me For. Today I wanted to kind of start to broach conversation about faith, really, and worship songs and those sort of experiences, really. And I was very aware of it's taken me a long time to think about talking about this, and even now I'm doing this as a sort of thinking it might be a first take because I've no clue what I want to say about it, really. I was brought up as a Christian in a Methodist household, I guess, and then walked completely away from that when I was probably about 18. Didn't feel any connection with it, didn't feel any sense of belief in it. And I went away with this kind of view that if it was real, if God was real, he would come back, somebody would come knocking on my door at some point, and that didn't happen until I was probably, I guess now, in my late 40s, early 50s, when suddenly it did come knocking again, and that's a story for some other space, really. But found myself in this position of faith, but a position I find is an uncomfortable one for me. Not about having the faith, but about understanding what that means. I also have this real dilemma of what saying that seems to represent to people these days, and what it represents to me. Actually, that's an ongoing dilemma. So I guess I would have to describe myself as a liberal Christian, somebody who's an intellectual Christian, somebody who believes in struggling with the understanding and meaning of my faith. I think that's important. I'm never been able to be what some people call, which maybe is very derogatory, a sort of happy, clappy sort of Christian. I'm not that. I'm not someone who just turns up to a formal church and sings hymns, but I do have a very deep faith and belief. But I'm really worried about what Christianity seems to represent in different places these days, and that's tricky, because I find it also, it's not a subject I'm very good at articulating, But I think the biggest dangers of this, and I feel like I'm giving a proviso at the beginning of this. Biggest danger for Christians is judging, really, and being judgmental and setting ourselves up to look more significant than other people, and those are things that I try not to do, and I try to be against. I stand up to, or I speak out to when I see them, really. So that's how I would like to describe that. And I kind of thought, well, maybe it's not a subject for this podcast, but then I thought, well, it's an important part of my life. And I have a funny relationship with it. I have this struggling relationship, which I don't mind. I think it's a good relationship to have with anything, really. That comes from being a psychotherapist too. These are those three threads of intersectionality in my life, which I really want to talk about how they all connect at some level, but not today. So music, being a musician, that's core to my soul. I'm a systemic psychotherapist, and when I came across the ideas of this and ideas of what we would call social constructionism, the idea that truth is socially constructed, we see that more and more these days, that there's no such thing as an objective truth. I guess what we might call the idea of safe uncertainty, and that it's important that we struggle with truth. That very often we get into these black and white linear places of this is true and this is wrong. It's sort of, and it can be very divisive. You're with us or you're not. I was thinking about this earlier and thinking of the example that really winds me up is when somebody's trying to sell me some sort of charity subscription. Now, I donate to charities. I sign up to that. I have things that I do, but I never do that by meeting somebody in the street or outside a shop. Would never do it that way. Try to think about what I'm doing and make choices from what I can afford and what I could do, really. But I always remember walking past, or trying to go into Morrison's, I think it was somewhere, and somebody outside. It was an animal charity. What did they say? It was something like, do you care about animals being tortured, or something like that? And it's such a yes and no answer, because if I say no, they know I'm not going to say no, because that's totally. If I say yes, they say, oh well, you really ought to be doing this, and it's a black and white situation. Maybe it's not a very good example, but it's kind of when people put you in a place where you're either in this camp or that camp, and I think very often most problems and dilemmas and situations are far more complex than that. Yeah, it isn't really a good example because that suggests, I think, that animals being tortured is somehow complex. It's not. It shouldn't happen, should it? But it's and I am completely opposed to it. But it doesn't mean I want to sign up to your charity. Really, we hear a lot at the moment. It's about oh, do you care about this? Are you into this? Are you into that? And I think it's obviously you can see how divisive it is. Really, dialogue, conversation, coming across the nuances and complexities of things seem more important to me. So that sits with the therapy model that I came across, really sits in my life. So there's an intersectionality between me as a musician and a songwriter and me as a therapist and then my faith and the beliefs that I have, really. I always say that I don't think I'm a very good Christian, but I don't really know what that means, really. I try to be, and I try to, where I can, be right by that, really, whatever that might mean. But I'm not so into the dogma and the doctrine of it all. Yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking. But be interesting to think about where those three paths of musical creativity and psychological therapy and spirituality, link with each other, really. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Well, look, I'm really rabbiting on here and babbling on about faith and this and that and the other, and I'm not sure I'm uncomfortable talking about it. It's interesting, I can sit and talk about music, but I start to talk about my faith and what it means. I'm a bit uncomfortable with it, but it is a part of my musical background and heritage. I lead a worship band in a church in Launceston, and I've done that for quite a while, and I find that hugely satisfying. I have come to discover that. Finding the spirituality and finding God within music is where I find it strongest and has the most meaning and affects me emotionally and makes me feel close to God in a way that mostly words don't, which is kind of interesting, and I think when I'm listening to something intellectual, I can find God in that, but there's nothing the same as just doing this music, and my privilege to lead that means that I get to choose what we sing, and I get to choose. I don't write worship songs, and I think that's quite interesting. But I think for the minute, I just wanted to go back to when I was at school, and because I had a brush with what I would call worship songs then, and I mentioned this a really long time ago in an earlier podcast when I was talking about the lessons that I'd had. It's about the third podcast, I think. And I was talking about how I'd started off with a teacher at school who taught classical guitar. Then I'd had a young woman who taught classical guitar. Then I had this really scary guy, and that was the thing I talked a bit about, who maybe had an alcohol problem, used to come round our house and intimidate the hell out of me, but he was an amazing guitarist. After that, when that stopped, my parents asked some young hip people at church whether they would... I think it was the guy who used to give me guitar lessons, and he was a folk guitarist, so I had this sort of folk lessons for him, and it really didn't fit or sit with me at all. And I was probably about 14, 15. Had that for a while. And then I stopped that. I don't know how that stopped, really. I have no memory of that. But when I got into maybe about the 5th and 6th form at school, so that's, what are we talking, 16, 17, 18, I had a chemistry teacher called Mr. Jefferson. I remember it. He was a I don't know what you'd call it, Calvinist Christian. I think Calvinist. I may have got this wrong, but group that believes at some level that there are a set number of people who are saved, and you can't do much but accept that you're either in that or you're not. And I don't agree with that at all. But he was in this group, but very very evangelical, very sort of born again Christian sort of situation, and I knew he was a really good guitarist. I remember him talking to me when we were band practicing sometime there, when I was in the band at school, about meeting Cliff Richard once and asking him about guitars, because he was trying to think of something to say to Cliff Richard, and he kind of asked him about guitars, and Cliff was talking about these wonderful guitars to get, and he said when he looked at them, he wouldn't look them up because we can do that, and then go into a music shop, ask about them. They were, sort of so expensive. Thousands and thousands of pounds back then, which is probably tens of thousands now. Nothing he could ever afford, nothing he could ever afford. But was an interesting thing to him. Anyway, I knew he was a good guitarist, and he was kind of a rock guitarist, and agreed to give me lessons in the lunch hour once a week, twice a week, I can't remember. But his proviso was that I would help him in the school Christian group, singing music group that he set up. And you have to understand now, I'm in a sort of place of disillusionment of faith. I wasn't really feeling my faith at that time, and that's just prior to me leaving it. So I didn't really want to do it, but I really wanted the lessons. He was great, and he was really useful to me, especially in sort of, I'm not very good at lead because I didn't stay with him long enough, but especially sort of in thinking about playing lead, and really got me into scales and warm-up scales, which, you know, I still use to this day, and just major chords, you know, major scales, harmonic scales, and just good for developing, you know, dexterity and strength in your fingers, and as a way of warming up and getting back into sort of playing the guitar. I use it sometimes when, you know, if I don't practice enough, I start to have to look at my guitar more and more to see where my fingers are. And I've often found that if I do this stuff with the sort of scales and that, it starts to help me to sort of be able to stop watching my hands quite so much. So good stuff to do. I thank him for that. He was a nice guy. I liked him. You didn't dislike him. So I kind of reluctantly joined this group, and I only remember 2 Christian songs that they used to do. And they were of a type that there was a guy called Garth Hewitt, I think, was around at the time, was a sort of Christian singer-songwriter. And they weren't worship songs as I would understand them today, but I remember one being called something like Jesus People. I remember it's like, Jesus people come to, let your light shine, let your light shine, oh let it shine, shine, shine. So we did this song. And then another one about, is a rich man worth more than a poor man? Is a stranger worth less than a friend? It was a more sort of like melancholic song. How much do you think you are worth, boy? See, I get my finger out when I got this. How much do you think you are worth, boy? Can anyone stand up and say? So I know these. It's funny, isn't it? They sit with me. These two songs that sit with me. So we did these songs, and essentially, I was in the 6th form, and everybody else in this group, because it was a new group, were first years. So, you know, really big age gap. So I was there with Mr. Jefferson, sort of part leading it, hating every minute of it, but doing it because I was getting guitar lessons from him, and it was kind of like the payment for it, really. And then we had to do a sort of school assembly, which was in the main sports hall of our school. Everybody was there, and everybody's got to walked in through the front to get there. And I had to agree to do this, and I thought, well, that's all right. What I'll do is Mr. Jefferson will be there, all the first years will be there, and I will stand at the back and hide. Because I didn't want any of my friends in 6th form to know. I was so ashamed of it, really ashamed of showing this stuff, especially at a time when I really didn't have the faith. I really was kind of thinking, I don't want to be here. Anyway, what happened? The day it was on, Mr. Jefferson was off sick. So all this group had to accompany them was me on my guitar. I've never been so humiliated and embarrassed in my entire life. You know, I had no amplification on the guitar. I was playing an acoustic guitar. This group of young people were enthusiastic, let's say, but it wasn't a great sound. And as assembly was starting, all the people I knew, friends and not so friendly people from the 6th form, were walking past me, just taking the mick out of me, taking the piss out of me, and I was kind of like there thinking, oh no, I'm so embarrassed by this. I really don't want to be here. And it was shameful, and I just thought, I never want to do this again. And in a way, it was part of the nail of a coffin for me of my faith at that time, really. I kind of just mention this because I think that I find it now, it's funny to think how I ended up back in this place of actually leading worship. I kind of joined a church, it's called the Vineyard Church, which I really liked and really fitted for me once we started going back. I started going back to church again. And it was very relaxed, and I didn't really want to go in first of all. And I used to sit outside during the worship. I used to listen to their worship. It was great. I loved the worship. I really did. Even then, it was quite different from anything I'd experienced, because as a kid it was all very formal hymns and stuff like this. I loved this stuff. It really sort of, pumped up about it. And but I like to sit outside in the sun. It was summer, and I remember they're friends of ours. Um, the woman who's her and her husband led the church. She coming outside saying, "Are you okay? You all right?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine." She said, "No, that's okay with us." Just leaving me there. It made such a difference. And they had coffee and tea, and you could get it during the service, and it was proper coffee. And I'm a bit of a coffee snob, so all in all, it was really, really a helpful way for me to move back into faith without having these people in suits telling me I should be doing this and that, which was my experience when I was a kid. And from that, I got used to more and more being in the church there. And then one of the worship leaders there approached me, and her name's Gilly, and I think she is actually the wife of Graham, who plays drums with me now. So it's all this. It starts to connect. It starts to connect. And she asked me if I'd be interested in being in her worship band, and I'd listened to them all, and I thought they're all okay. But having come from a band background, I thought they're all okay, but they're not good enough. And I said to her, "I'll do it if you're prepared to see this as a proper band, so that we meet once a week and we practice." And she said, "Yeah, I'm really up for that. I'd love to do that." And so her and the bass player, a guy called Chris, a lovely guy called Chris, and myself, and some singers that came and gone at different times. And Gray was playing cajon at that time, and just sort of doing some percussive stuff with that. We used to meet once a week and eat and practice really, and I really appreciate that. And big up to Jilly. She brought me back into that space, really. So we did that for quite a few years, and it was a kind of like a sort of, to me, funny, healthy rivalry between the worship bands. It's a couple of the other worship leaders. I'd be saying, we're going to be so hot at this, we're going to be a proper band. We're going to be, and we were. I think we were quite upbeat, and so I think everybody else raised their game as well, and it was good. I think worship really improved at that time. And then, when we moved to Cornwall, we've started another church, and they really have hardly any worship people to do worship at all. And so I kind of said, well, I'll do this. I've got some experience, and now I lead a worship band, and I seem to be well received, and people like it. It's completely different in a way. I don't even consider writing worship songs, and I don't know if I could really. Maybe I could. Maybe I should. There's a structure and a certain parameters to that. In that they really need to be from biblical verses, or they need to be from parts of the Bible, and you need to sort of write things that sort of sit with those words, and that immediately feels restrictive, which maybe it shouldn't, but it does feel restrictive, so it's kind of hard to think about how you wrap off into songs from that. But of course there are a lot of very successful worship bands out there playing. One of my sons says a lot of them sound like U2. It's got that sort of U2 vibe to some of that, but I would say some of those bands. But some of the music's quite good. I do enjoy doing it enough that I've put myself in. You wouldn't know, but this is a really vulnerable space for me to sort of talk about my faith at all. And as I say, especially at a time when that faith is being used to justify lots of really uncomfortable and not okay things, really, and is often used to condemn and judge people in groups who are already condemned and judged, because we're all afraid of the other, which shifts me back into the therapy circle, really, being afraid of people that are not like ourselves. There we go. Maybe a sort of deep place to end, but I really would like to do something on the intersectionality between the three. I'm sorry if that's not much about original music, really, but I've talked so much about me, it kind of feels like that maybe from time to time I need to touch base with me, and this is a part of me I've not really shared. I mentioned it once or twice, but it is part of how I learnt to be a guitarist, and actually, it was a performance at a time when I think I realised how uncool I was as a person, but I was trying to be cool that time, and this just sort of went in the complete opposite direction for me. What I would say about that Mr. Jefferson and his church, actually, we did something for them once with these young people. I can't really remember, but what I do remember is that we had a practice for them, and that I don't know, 4, 5, 6 what seemed like young adults came over with a load of Chinese takeaway for us all afterwards, and we all sat around chatting, and they were such nice people. Nobody tried to convert me, nobody tried to talk about their faith. They just, it was good communion with in a friendly way. I mean communion between people, of just sitting and chatting and showing that they were nice, thoughtful people. And that had an impact on me as a person at other times who's been the victim of people insisting on trying to make me come to faith during the time when I wasn't a Christian, and telling me how condemned and damned I was, and all of these things which had no effect on me whatsoever, other than to harden me against it, really. But people living how maybe something about how their faith is or what they believe, I kind of like that. I don't know. Anyway, going to get into rambling. Going to stop now. I think I'm hoping. Yeah, I think I've got another interview coming up in the next couple of weeks with a young band called the Ragdolls. It was sort of Plymouth-based, and goodness me, I've forgotten where else they're based. Calstock, which is a lovely place. So yeah, thinking about how we hook up. Maybe in Plymouth, but I will be looking forward to talking to them. And yeah, I'm going to decide now whether I'm going to put this one out or not. I got to have a think and listen to what I said. Please follow, subscribe, look at the band, #MusicTheCurve, and I'll be back soon.
And it takes a little humbleness to